This little box is made in a style known as Tramp Art. There's no single definition of Tramp Art, but generally what that means is thin layers of wood with notches all around the edges. It's thought to have originated in Scandinavia in the mid-19th century before passing through Europe and the Americas. The typical myth depicts hobos and other vagrants dumpster diving for used cigar box wood, then carving these with a knife while waiting to hop a freight train perhaps, and bartering them for food or lodging. More recent scholarship depicts the craftsmen as homeowners who were doing this as an ongoing hobby. Many years ago, I found a book describing how to make tramp art using a knife. I pretty quickly realized, though, that these tramps and hobos had a lot more free time on their hands than I did, and so as an unapologetic power tool junkie, I figured there had to be a better way to do it using a router. The basic idea is to take a thin piece of wood, tilt it at 45 degrees, and run it over the router bit like that. That'll make a nice little notch. The hard part is to create an indexing system so all these notches are evenly spaced. And so I give to you the Tramp Art jig. In this video series, I'm going to show you how to make the jig, put it to use, and make some nice looking tramp art projects. Detailed instructions and plans for lots of different projects are in my book available on Amazon. Let's start with the base. I like a nice thick slab of MDF, but plywood or particle board would work okay here too. The dimensions aren't real critical. I recommend about 18 inches by a width of 8 or 9 inches, and then you need to rip a 45-degree bevel on the leading edge. The next step is to get the base to slide on the router table like this. A lot of router tables have a miter slot, but on mine I have a pair of runners on the sides. The important thing is that it's centered on the bit and that it's at a right angle to the base. Next, make some little support blocks, 45 degrees, about 3 inches on the short side, and glue them into place right around here. The next piece to make is this backing board. It's just as long as the base. The width is about 6 inches, but if your fingers are really short, you might want to make it smaller. And this also gets beveled on one edge, so it can be glued down right here. I used 1/4-inch hardboard for this, but 1/4-inch plywood would work just as well. And here's what it should look like at this point. The heart of the jig is the indexing board. This is 3/4 of an inch thick, about 6.5 inches wide, depending on how long your fingers are, and I'm going to show you 2 different techniques for making them. The length of the indexing board needs to be at least as long as the base, 18 inches, maybe even a little longer depending on the size of the pieces you want to make. The space between the bit and the right edge needs to be more than the length of the piece you want to notch. This one's 22 inches, 18 inches would be fine. Rip one of the long edges at 45 degrees, but this time make it a chamfer, not a bevel, leaving about 1/8 of an inch of the edge still at 90 degrees. Temporarily clamp the indexing board into place, and with a small drill bit, make some marking holes through the indexing board and the backing board on each side. Position these so you have room for a wing nut on the back side. The indexing board will be attached with 1/4-inch by 1-inch machine screws with fender washers and wing nuts. On the indexing board, enlarge each hole to 1/4 inch, then counterbore it so the screw head will be below the surface. The indexing board needs to be adjustable side to side, so the holes on the backing board are enlarged to 1/2 inch. Now comes the hard part of the project, and that's to make a series of grooves in the indexing board. Each one of these is going to correspond to where one of the notches goes. Before going any further, you need to decide what thickness of wood you're going to be using. I recommend 1/8 of an inch. It looks great. You can buy it in this thickness, you can plane it to this thickness, and if you make your jig for 1/8 of an inch, you can also use it for 1/4 inch stock by using every other groove. Now, you would think if the wood is 1/8 of an inch thick and the bit is 90 degrees, that the notches should be 1/4 inch apart, but it's actually different. You can see the reason why on this oversized piece. When it goes over the bit at an angle, it is indeed 90 degrees, but on the edge, it's actually a different angle. Here's another way of looking at it. It's true that if it were like this, the notch would be 1/8 of an inch deep and 1/4 inch wide. But when we tilt the workpiece up like this, we now have to lower the bit. And when you lower the bit, the width of the cut is now less than 1/4 of an inch. And if you do the math, you'll find that the width of each notch should actually be 0.177 inches. And that means that on this indexing board, these grooves have to be every 0.177 inch. So I painted the edge white to see it better, then put a pencil mark every 0.177 inch using a pair of calipers. It's most accurate to take all these measurements from the right-hand side so errors don't get compounded. My caliper ends at 6 inches, so once I got to that point, I had to start anew to keep going. And now on the table saw, you can very carefully cut a shallow dado at each of these marks. The depth of these cuts isn't important, anywhere from 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, but they do need to be evenly spaced and square to the edge. Well, sometimes I get it right, and sometimes the spacing is way off. I could route this out, glue in some wood, and do it over, but instead, let me show you an alternative method for making the indexing board. This time I'm going to glue it up from individual strips. I'll rip some 3/4 inch wood, poplar this time, into strips a little bit more than the 0.177 inches we need. And then with the planer, I can shave them down to exactly 0.177 inch thick. I can then cross-cut them all to, say, 6.5 inches, the width of the indexing board. You'll need about 65 pieces, plus plenty of extras just in case. And on the router table, make a rabbet on one edge. The dimensions aren't critical, say half the thickness and about equal width and depth. The important part is that they're all the same. Then start gluing the strips together. Make sure no glue squeeze out gets in the grooves. Clamp them all together, making sure the edges are flush, and clamp them down flat too. I did this in batches of 10 and then glued the batches together. The left side doesn't need grooves, so you can just glue on blocks of wood here. This is probably more accurate than the first technique. One drawback though is that with the grain running this way, it might cup with changes in humidity. Like the other technique, it needs a chamfer along the leading edge, and then holes drilled in counterboard for the hardware. Either way you choose to make it, the indexing board can now be bolted to the backing board. Coming up, I'll show you how to adjust the indexing board side to side. There is one more part to make though, and that's the stop block. It has a skinny little tongue that rides in the grooves we just made, and that lets you move it over step by step. The bottom of the stop block is basically a pair of shallow rabbets. So with the router table, you can very slowly raise the bit until the tongue fits perfectly in a groove. The bottom of the stop block gets a 45-degree miter, and make certain that the stop block is perpendicular to the table. If not, I guess you could sand the left edge to make it square. And with that, the jig is complete. Let's put it to use. The router bit we're using is a 90-degree V-groove bit. Any size shank is fine. I recently swapped in a brand new bit, and having it sharp really makes a difference. Set the height of the bit so it just hits the edge of the workpiece. You'll have to do this by trial and error. Hold a piece of 1/8 inch wood against the stop block and right down on the table, then slide the jig over the bit. Remove the workpiece, retract the jig, move the stop block over, and repeat. Obviously, keep your fingers away from the spinning bit. Later on, I'll show you a tip to keep your fingers safe when using smaller sized pieces. On this test piece, the bit was too high and it poked through to the other side. I'll lower it a smidgen until it's just right. Inevitably, there's going to be some tear out, so sand the face and edges with 150 grit, and then to take care of the tear out in the notches, take a piece of sandpaper, fold it into a little right angle like this, and just give it a couple of swipes in each notch. Now is a great time to make up a measuring stick. We aren't going to be working in inches or millimeters anymore. The wood we're going to use will have dimensions that are a multiple of the notch width. So take a piece of wood, make at least 20 notches in it, cross-cut one end so it's right at the start of a notch, and then label them. This measuring stick will be very useful throughout the project. To make a simple box, I'll need stock that has a width of 13 notch widths, or 13N. You can use the measuring stick to set up the table saw, or do it mathematically with a caliper. We'll also need some stock that's 11N, 9N, and 7N, so you might as well make a whole batch of them while you're at it. Let's say you need a piece that's 13N wide and 21N long. We need to cross-cut the stock at 21N. In my opinion, the safest and most accurate way to do this is with a cross-cut sled for the table saw. There are lots of free plans available for making these. It has a stop block for repetitive cuts and a wooden hold down too. I made this hole down on the bandsaw. It tapers down to a little finger, which will be necessary for very small pieces, and it rides in this T-track. Leave a little gap here so you can fit the bolt head in. Now, using the measuring stick set to 21, clamp the stop block into position. Square off one end of the stock and then cut it to length. Watch out for the blade, of course, when the sled passes by. Some designs have a cage in the back to cover the saw blade. One more thing before we actually start routing the notches. If you put the first notch right at a corner, it will overlap with the notch from the adjacent side, and the corner will inevitably break away. It's much better to offset the notches by half a notch width at each corner like this. As a result, our 13 by 21 piece will actually have 12 by 20 notches. To get a half notch width on each side, you can get close to it by marking it here with the measuring stick. Then loosen the bolts on the jig and adjust the indexing board side to side so that the router bit lines up with that mark. Route the first notch and the last notch, then adjust the side to side so that the offsets are equal. Tighten the bolts because we won't have to change them again until we get into some non-rectangular shapes. Now that you know where the first notch is, you can number the grooves on the indexing board. And finally, we can route all the notches on this piece. I'll usually notch all 4 sides at one position before moving the stop block over. Just don't forget to notch only the long sides once you get past number 12. For the tear out, sand the faces and edges with 150 grit, give each notch a few swipes with some folded 150 grit, and then sand the faces and edge again with 220. Make sure to fix any little defects now. It'll be much more difficult after the pieces are glued together. Here's the piece we just made, and in most Tramp Art the next layer is a little smaller, so it forms a nice little pyramid like this. I like to make the successive layer 2 notch widths smaller than the first, that way the notches all line up nicely. So if the first layer is 13 by 21, the next one is going to be 11 by 19. We're going to keep going like this, but as the pieces get smaller, it's a little dangerous putting your fingers this close to the bit. So I promised I'd show you how to keep your fingers safe, and that's to make a support block like this one. It's just a piece of scrap wood, random size, with an 1/8 inch piece of stock glued on here. There's an overhanging rabbet of about 1 inch on one end. On the other end, it's about 1/2 inch. The important part is that both edges are flush and that the rabbet is square. You can then put a piece of double-sided carpet tape in the rabbet and you put your workpiece right in here. Just make sure it's flush on the edge and that'll keep your fingers safe. In the next video, I'll show you step by step how to make a simple rectangular box like this one. For detailed instructions and many more project plans, check out my book available on Amazon.